Good morning. Jupiter here. Okay. We are on chapter 9 in not City of Ember, The People of Sparks. Sorry. Okay. Chapter 9 Hard, Hungry Work. Instead of getting easier as the days went on, work for the people of Ember got harder. It wasn't just the work, it was the heat they had to work in. Every day was hotter than the last. Dune had never felt this warm in his life. It was like being cooked. All the people of Ember felt this way. They sweated, their skin turned red and stung and peeled off, and the brightness of the sky hurt their eyes. They got terrible headaches. Sometimes one of them would drop to the ground in a faint just from being too hot. At times like these, people thought, "This is a dreadful place we have come to." They put their hands over their eyes, missing the familiar darkness. The team leaders tried to be understanding when their workers dropped and fainted, but the people of Sparks were used to the heat. Beside them, the people of Ember seemed like weaklings. A few times, Dune saw the leader of his team press his lips together and drum his finger against his leg when one of the Emberites had to sit down and rest. Dune's team leader was Chugger Frisk, a big, stubble-jawed man who didn't talk much except to give directions. Every day he sent his team wherever it was most needed. Dune did all kinds of jobs over the next few weeks. He dug ditches for the pipes that conducted water from the river and the crops in the fields. He repaired the wagons that hauled the produce home from the field. He picked fruit, built fences, planted seeds, stirred vats of soap, and dug chicken droppings into the cabbage field. Except for being so hot, he didn't mind the work. He was getting strong, and he liked being strong. He liked feeling the muscles in his arms getting harder, and he liked being taller. He knew he was taller because his old pants were too short. The feeling of being a new person in this new world stayed with him. He would be 13 soon, not a child anymore. Work was making him sturdy and ready for anything. Besides, as he worked, he was finding out all kinds of things he wanted to learn. How did the pumps work that brought water up from the river to the fields? How was cheese made, and shoes, and candles? Where did they get the ice that kept things cold in their big ice houses? What were the bushy tailed animals that scurried up trees, and the long rope like animals that he sometimes almost stepped on in the grass? He wanted to know how houses were built, and what glass was made of, and how bicycles worked. It was exciting having so much to learn, but every time he remembered that he and his people had less than 6 months to learn it, less than 6 months to master all the skills they need to build a town of their own, a worm of fear twisted in his stomach. Chugger wouldn't answer questions. He was too busy giving directions or working, so Dune often asked his questions at lunch. Sometimes Ordney answered him, sometimes Martha did. Ordney's answers were more like lectures, and Martha's were more like boast. After a while, it was clear that both of them were getting tired of all the questions, so Dune started to ask fewer. One day, Kenny followed him outside after lunch and stretched up to whisper in his ear, "I can show you where there's answers to all your questions. Want me to?" he said. "Sure," said Dune. "Right now?" said Kenny. "Okay," said Dune. Kenny led them through the streets of the village, going first toward the river and then away from it, along a street that led out away from the houses and into a grove of oak trees. "There," said Kenny, pointing ahead. At first, Dune saw only the long line of a roof above the trees. Then the street opened out into a big, empty space that he could see had once been covered with pavement. Now the pavement was cracked and weeds grew up through it. To the left of the span of pavement stood a huge building, a rectangular structure so tremendous it could have held both the Ember School and the Gathering Hall. And at the end facing them were two massive wooden doors, which Kenny walked toward. "In the ancient days," Kenny said, "you didn't have to open these. They were made out of glass and they had eyes and opened as soon as they saw you." "That can't be true," said Dune. "It was, though," Kenny said. Above the door was a sign missing most of its letters. It was a long sign, so you could tell whatever it used to say was a long word, but now all it said was, "Oop Ark." "What does that mean?" Dune asked, pointing to the sign. "I don't know," Kenny said. "We just call it the Ark. It's our storehouse. We're going around to the back." He led the way around the side of the building to a small door in the back wall, which he opened. He had to push hard, because something was behind the door that had to be shoved out of the way. Dune peered into the darkness. At first he couldn't make out what he was seeing. Lumpy mountains appeared to fill the room to the ceiling and spread from wall to wall. He took a step forward, but his foot jammed against something hard on the floor. There's answers to everything in here, said Kenny. As his eyes adjusted to the dimness, Dune saw that the room was full of, was it boxes? No, they almost looked like books. They lay in toppling stacks, giant heaps, sliding mounds, as if they had been dumped in from an enormous bucket. Some of them lay open with their pages crumpled. Some were so warped that their covers curved. A smell of ancient dust and mold arose from them. He reached down and picked one up. Its cover was furred with dust. He opened it and saw pages of tiny, neat printing. It was a book. Yes. Not like the books of Ember. These were much bigger and sturdier and had much more writing. He rifled the pages. More dust flew up, but he couldn't tell what the book was about. One page said, Chapter XV, the thermodynamics of aluminum. He had no idea what that meant. This is amazing, said Dune. Can I take some back to the hotel? I guess so, said Kenny. I don't think anyone will notice. Dune set down the book about thermodynamics. He brushed his smudged fingers across his pants. He felt like a hungry person who had been led to an immense banquet, far more food than he could eat in his whole life. He was starving all of a sudden for the knowledge hidden in these books. He reached out and chose 3 of them blindly, not even looking at the titles. Don't you want some? He said to Kenny. No, said Kenny. I already read 4 books in school. That was enough. We learned about history, pre and post. Pre and post? Pre-disaster and post-disaster. Oh, said Dune. What do you like to do then? He asked. Just poke around, said Kenny. I poke around in the woods. You could come with me sometimes, he said, looking up at Dune with hopeful eyes. If you want. Maybe I will, Dune said, though he was thinking probably he wouldn't. He had so many other things in mind to do. Besides, Kenny was a little young to be his friend. During the first week after the Emberites arrived, Martha Parton had showed off her cooking skills at lunch every day. She made mashed potato pie, fresh peas with chives, walnut croquettes, mushroom gravy, cheese popovers, red onion and bean dumplings, scrambled eggs with tomato jam, apricot pudding, and apple butter cookies. Every time she brought in a new dish, she said, I don't imagine you've had these where you come from, or this should be new to you. And the Ember guest would say, You're right, we've never had this. We've never tasted anything so delicious. It's wonderful. And Martha's mouth would crimp into a small, pleased smile. As time went on, however, the food at lunchtime became plainer. Martha got tired of making something new every day to impress her guests. What they found in their dinner and breakfast parcels became less interesting too. Usually it was some chunks of cornbread, 10 or 12 carrot sticks, and a few slimy bits of goat cheese. If they were lucky, there might be a hard-boiled egg. Martha took to mentioning, as if it were a little joke, that even though the Partons were giving extra food from the storehouse because of the extra people, it seemed as if they had less. Wasn't that odd? Dune started to feel hungry a fair amount of the time, and he knew the others did too. His father never spoke of it, but Edward Pocket griped about the food every evening. I know I'm old and small, he'd say, polishing off the last crumbs of both his dinner and breakfast, but that doesn't mean I can live on air. One day Orny made a disturbing announcement. The cabbage crop, he said, was going to be smaller than expected. Worms had gotten into it. They have only about 2/3 of the cabbage they had last year. After this, not only was the food at lunchtime plainer, but there was less of it. One week they had string beans, last year's pickled cabbage, and goat's milk pudding for lunch 4 days in a row. And when they opened their baskets at dinner time, they found only a bottle of cold potato soup to serve as both dinner and breakfast. Clary had started a garden just a few days after the Emberites arrived at the Pioneer Hotel. She cleared a patch of ground about 40 feet square, not far from the riverbank, and planted seeds that she had brought from Ember. Children who were too little to go to work in the village helped her pull weeds and fetch buckets of water from the river. Old people sat in the shade giving her advice. After a while, green shoots appeared in rows on the patch of dirt, and Clary was out there every morning and every evening tending them. In several weeks, there would be a little extra food for the people of Ember out in their own front yard. But it wouldn't be nearly enough. Some people were already grumbling about their skimpy dinner parcels. One night, when Dune was in room 215 eating with his father and the others, He heard voices in the hall and went out to see a cluster of people a few doors down. Lizzie was there. Dune spotted the red cloud of her hair. Tick was there too, his voice carried above the rest. Well, I got 3 carrots, a plum, and a chunk of sour cheese, he said. Lucky me, that ought to keep me going for a while. A few people laughed dryly at this. Dune heard Lizzie giggle. It'll keep you going for maybe half an hour, someone said. I don't know how they think we can work with nothing but scraps to eat. Along the hall, other doors opened and other voices joined in. All I got was some limp green beans and a few clumps of porridge. I've had carrot soup 3 days in a row. Some people counseled patience. We shouldn't complain, someone would say. It's hard for them to give us food. We should be grateful. I am tired of being grateful, someone else broke in. They promised to feed us, and they're starving us instead. It seems to me, said Tick, that we should do something about it. I think maybe I'll mention the problem at lunch tomorrow. Maybe we all should. Maybe we should tell them it's very hard to work when we're so hungry all the time. I'll tell them, cried Lizzie's high voice, and other voices rose in agreement. An excited, angry babble filled the hallway, drowning out those who spoke for patience. I'll speak up. We have to protest. Tick is so right. Tick for mayor, someone shouted, laughing. For a second, Tick looked surprised. Then his eyes glowed with pleasure. He raised a fist in the air. We'll stand up for ourselves, he said, and the people around him roared and raised their fists too. Dune turned to his father and Edward and Sage, who had all come to the door to see what was going on. We should tell the Partons, he said. If we are working, we need enough to eat. It's only fair. Of course they don't have to give us anything, said Dune's father. They're giving what they think they can spare. He looked sadly at the dried chunk of cornbread in his hand. But I suppose it can't hurt to mention it, he said, without being rude, of course. I imagine they're doing the best they can. Mrs. Polster agreed to be the one to bring the matter up. She did so at lunch the next day. They were having cold spinach soup. I have a request, she said firmly. She set down her spoon. Everyone looked toward her. Dune felt a jitter in his stomach. We have noticed, said Mrs. Polster, that the food parcels you so generously give us have become considerably smaller lately. We find that when we have eaten what is within, we are still, to be frank, hungry. This is a difficulty for us. There was silence. Everyone stared at Mrs. Polster, who sat very calmly with her hands in her lap, waiting for an answer. What? Said Martha Parton at last. Did I hear you right? I believe so, said Mrs. Polster, unless you have ear trouble. I said we are not getting enough food to eat. Martha laughed a one-note laugh. Ha! A laugh of disbelief. Kenny stopped chewing and looked frightened. Orny drew himself up and cleared his throat. I am surprised, he said. I had thought you people understood the situation. We do indeed, said Dune's father hastily. We're very grateful for what you're doing for us. It's just that we're working quite hard, said Clary. It's a very small amount, said Miss Thorne timidly. For both dinner and breakfast, added Edward Pocket. Last night, said Dune, I had a boiled egg and 3 carrots for dinner, and nothing for breakfast this morning. Then there was silence again, a terrible, vibrating silence. Then Orny leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table with his fingertips. Now you listen here, he said. We're doing the best we can with what has been asked of us, and I must say, a great deal has been asked. Suddenly, we're supposed to feed twice as many people as before, more than twice as many. He glared at the Emberites, shifting his eyes from each one. And yet we do not have twice as much food as we did before. It's true that each family has been giving a little extra from the storehouse for an emergency, but not much. Sparks Village just does not have enough for 400 extra people. Are we supposed to feed you instead of our own families? Why should we? Who are you anyway? You're just strangers from some city no one's even ever heard of. But at the end of his speech, Orny's face was a deep red and his voice was shaking with rage. Dune felt frozen. All he could think was, he's right. Of course he's right. But so are we. Everyone else must have been thinking the same thing. They finished their soup in silence. At the end of the meal, Martha dumped the food parcels on the table instead of handing them out. They each took one, but Dune's father was the only person who said thank you. Later, when Dune opened his parcel, he found a wedge of cabbage leaves turning yellow at the edges and a hunk of some sort of bean cake. His stomach clenched. They're tired of helping us, he thought. What are we going to do? Chapter 10, Restless Weeks. Poppy was now almost well. She still slept more than usual, but when she wasn't sleeping, she tromped around the doctor's house, pulling spoons off the table and spilling cups of water and crumpling pages of books. That is, she was almost back to her old self. So Lena often asked Mrs. Murdo if it wasn't time for them to go and live with the others at the Pioneer Hotel. Mrs. Murdo always said she wasn't quite ready. They'd wait until the brother came, she said. Lena had a feeling the real reason was that she liked helping the doctor. She was always poring over the doctor's big medicine books and helping her pick her herbs and mix her remedies, so she stayed on. And Lena worked for the doctor. It wasn't that she didn't like working, but in Ember she had an adventurous job, an important job. She'd run with her messages all over the city, running the way she loved to, so fast she almost flew. It was hard for her to stay in one place all day. She was restless and bored. She did a huge amount of cooking. Well, not cooking exactly, since the doctor rarely wanted to bother making a fire in the stove, but chopping and peeling and slicing and mixing. She wiped up spilled medicines and herbal solutions from the counters. She swept dirt from the floor. She pulled down cobwebs from the ceiling. There was always rags to be torn into bandages. There was always herbs to be pounded into powder, and bottles to be labeled, and plants to be watered. While everyone else was out in the village doing new, interesting things and meeting new people, Lena was stuck doing housework. One day, she asked the doctor if there was any extra paper she could use for drawing. There wasn't, the doctor said, but if she could find blank pages at the back of books, she could use those. So Lena tore out 8 blank pages, the doctor gave her a pencil, and she began drawing whenever she had a few minutes of free time. Out of habit, she drew the city she had always drawn. She hardly knew how to draw anything else, but she thought that since she was here in the real world, she should be able to imagine the city much better than before. She remembered the first drawing she'd done with her colored pencils, back in Ember, when she made the sky blue instead of its normal black. She had thought it was just such an ordinary, imaginary thing. A little crazy, right, to draw a blue sky? But now look, the sky really was blue. She must have known that somehow in some secret place in her mind. Something in her was a little bit magic, maybe. She could see beyond what was right in front of her eyes to things that used to be, or things that could be in the future. So she shut her eyes and tried to look deep into her imagination. But the old version of the city, the one she'd drawn so many times, seemed to be stamped inside her eyelids. She kept drawing the same theme, the tall buildings, the lighted windows. She added a few extras, some trees, a couple of trucks with their oxen, a chicken. But it didn't look quite right. Would the buildings be taller than the trees? And how much taller? Would there be chickens in a city? She felt discouraged. So she set aside her city drawings and tried to draw what she saw around her. She drew the lemon tree outside the doctor's back door. She drew her bike. She drew the front of the doctor's house and the gate and the grapevine over the door. Once a truck parked a little way up the road to unload some crates, and she dashed out with her paper and pencil to draw the truck and the oxen. But none of these gave her quite the same thrill as drawing the city. There was a feeling that went with drawing the city, a feeling of longing and excitement and mystery. It was as if her drawings of the city were a half-open window, a glimpse of something she couldn't see quite clearly. Torrin sometimes came up behind her when she was drawing and peered over her shoulder. Now and then he would point out some part of the picture that didn't look great, but most of the time he didn't comment at all. He was hopping with impatience these days, waiting for his brother to come home. "He'll be bringing me something," he said one day. "Every time he comes home, he brings me something." He went to the window seat and took his bag of treasures from the cabinet underneath. "I'll show you these," he said to Lena, "if you promise not to touch them." Lena wandered over. She didn't want to appear too interested, since Torrin was certainly never interested in anything she did, but she was curious about these prized possessions he had been hiding. He reached into the bag and took out one thing at a time, placing it carefully on the window ledge. There were 6 names, all different. Lena could not identify a single one of them. "Casper brought me these," Torrin said. He lined them up, making tiny adjustments to the positions until he got them just right. "They're all extinct." Lena took a step closer and bent down to look. Don't touch them, Torin cried. I'm not, said Lena irritably. Well, what are they? Torin pointed to the first thing, which was shaped like a T and made out of scratched silver metal. An airplane, Torin said. It carried people through the air. Oh, come on, said Lena. It's not even a foot long. Real airplanes did, Torin said. This is just a model of a real airplane. He pointed to the next one. A tank, he said. It runs over people and crushes them. What's the point of that? Lena asked. Torin sighed at Lena's stupidity. It's for fighting enemies, he said. The next thing looked like a short, chubby bike. Motorcycle, said Torin. It goes really fast. Then came a battered silver tube. Flashlight. You push this button and light comes out. Show me, Lena said. It doesn't work, said Torin. I told you, all these things are extinct. The next thing was a black rectangle with rows of small, colored buttons. Remote, said Torin. What's it for? It makes things happen when you press the buttons. What kind of things? Just things, said Torin. I don't know. It's very technical. The last thing was different from all the rest. It seemed to be an animal made out of some stiff, grayish material. It stood about 10 inches high on 4 thick feet. Elephant, said Torin. As tall as a house. Tall as a house? Lena tried to imagine it. You mean if I stood next to one, I'd only come up to here? She pointed to the elephant's knee. Torin swatted her hand away. It was the biggest animal on earth, he said. If it wrapped its nose around you, you would die. I'd love to see one, Lena said. You can't. There aren't any more. Torin spread his arms out, hiding his treasures from view. You have to go away now. You only get one look, he said. So Lena went out into the courtyard and picked a few green grapes, which turned out to be much too hard and sour to eat. Through the window, she could see Torin moving the tank and the motorcycle toward each other, and she could hear him making growling and crashing noises. What must the ancient world have been like, she wondered, with all these strange things moving around in it? Was it wonderful or terrible? One afternoon, when Lena was in the village picking up some salt for the doctor, she saw a long line of people at a clothing shop. A few Emberites were among them. Lizzie was in the line, wearing the black scarf around her neck that she had worn ever since she arrived, to show that she was mourning for Looper, her boyfriend back in Ember. Why are there so many people here? Lena asked. They have eyeglasses, Lizzie said. A roamer brought in a special load of them yesterday. Glasses? But you don't wear glasses. These are dark glasses, Lizzie said. They call them sunglasses. They make it so the light doesn't hurt your eyes so much. Most of the people of Sparks already had sunglasses. A couple of the work leaders, understanding how much the light bothered the Emberites' eyes, traded some extra wooden crates for a couple of boxes of the glasses and gave them out for free. Lena tried some on but didn't like them because they made all the green look brownish. She also thought they made people look sneaky, as if they had secret, evil plans. Lena liked going to the market plaza. It was always alive with people and animals, and the markets had things she had never seen before. Sandals made of old truck tires, hats and baskets woven of straw. It was a noisy, bustling, interesting place. It was also very messy. The animals made the mess. Goats and oxen, pulling carts in from the field, left their big, smelly poops all over. They got cleaned up eventually. Someone would come and scrape them into buckets and take them away. But often this didn't happen until halfway through the morning, and people had to step carefully until then and breathe in that powerful smell. This gave Lena a good idea. She would do a favor for the marketplace, she decided. Everyone would appreciate it. So the next morning, just at dawn, she rode her bike down to the plaza with a big bucket hanging from the handlebars. She scooped up a load of cow plops and goat plops and dumped them into the river. Back and forth from the plaza to the river she went, scraping up one smelly, squashy load after another. And when she was just about to dump the last load, some of the shopkeepers arrived. She smiled at them, expecting some words of approval, but instead his face was in a rage. What are you doing? He shouted. He started running toward her. Dumping that good stuff in the river. What is the matter with you? He seemed unable to believe his eyes. Good stuff, thought Lena. What was he talking about? He snatched the bucket out of her hand. You people are... He stopped. He pressed his lips together and closed his eyes for a moment. All right, he said in a tight voice. I suppose you don't know. This stuff is precious. You do not throw it into the river. Lena took a step backward. She felt as if she had been slapped. Oh, what do you do with it? She said. It goes out to the fields, the man said. It goes into the rotting pile, and when it's ready, they dig it into the ground. It's fertilizer. I guess you've never heard of it. No, said Lena. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I was trying to be helpful. The most helpful thing you people could do would be to. Well, never mind. He gave Lena a last disgusted look and walked away, leaving her with a half filled bucket she didn't know what to do with. She carried it out to the village and up the road, and when no one was around, she dumped its contents at the side of the field. It wasn't only Lena who was getting into this kind of trouble. As time went on, she heard about other people doing or saying the wrong thing and irritating the people of Sparks. Sometimes it was because they seemed stupid. People from Ember were frightened by the chickens, had never seen a cloud, didn't know the meaning of ordinary words like storm and forest and cat and lemon. They knew nothing about history. They had never heard of other countries. They didn't even know that the earth was round like a ball. To the villagers, they seemed unbelievably dumb. On the other hand, they sometimes acted a bit superior, boasting of the things they had in their underground city. The villagers didn't like hearing that in Ember people had electric lights and flush toilets and hot and cold running water. Once when Lister Monk, who had been the pipework supervisor, was telling the Sparks man about the generator, the man called him a liar. When Lester protested that he was telling the truth and implied that Sparks was a rather backward place compared to Ember, the man hit him. It took 5 people to break up the fight. Worst of all was the ravenous hunger of the Emberites. The village families were pleased that these strangers were so impressed by their fruits and vegetables, but they were also worried. Their leaders had told them the newcomers were to be fed, and all households were being supplied with extra food for the purpose. But the people of Ember never seemed to get full. They cleaned every last crumb off their plates, asked for seconds, finished those, and then sat there looking hungry. The villagers resented it. Lena sometimes overheard them talking in the markets. It's too much to ask, she heard a woman grumbling. And these cave people are going to be here for another 5 months? Am I going to give them some of my strawberry crop? I don't see why I should. And another woman was even more direct. I wish they would just get out of here. It's hard enough to feed your own family, much less a bunch of strangers. Lena wasn't used to feeling unwanted. She didn't like it. There were plenty of things about this place she didn't like. The dust that coated her feet and legs, for instance, turning them into a yellowish brown. The tiny bugs that bit her and made red itchy spots on her arms. The way the sun burned the back of her neck. This place wasn't so perfect, she wanted to tell those crabby villagers. In Ember, for instance, they didn't have so many mean, snotty people as they did here. Lena sometimes rode down to the Pioneer Hotel to see Dune. He always seemed glad to see her, but it wasn't the same as if they were back in Ember, when they were involved in the desperate search for a way out. Dune showed her around the Pioneer, and he told her about the work he did and the people he ate his lunch with, but he seemed distracted, or troubled, as if he was trying to solve a problem that he wasn't telling her about. Lena would ride back to the doctor's house after these visits, with thoughts struggling against each other in her mind. She missed the old Dune, her clever, adventurous partner, and she herself felt different here too. She didn't know what to do or how to be. Some of the people were trying to be kind, but there was so much unkindness mixed in with it. To the people of Sparks, the people of Ember were just a nuisance. How could they stay in a place where they weren't wanted? The world was huge. There must be another place in it for the people of Ember. A sneak peek, the next chapter is called Ticks Projects. So, there seems to be some tensions growing between the city of the Emberites, who are now in the city of Sparks, and there are some real problems that they are being faced with. So tell me what you think about some of these conflicts that they're having. You can write me on Google Classroom or Class Dojo as always. It is a beautiful sunny day outside today. I have our class plants are doing nice and well. Get out into the sunshine, and I hope you guys have a great Friday. Bye.